but one of them. And this isn't just new in the last 10 years. It's been around a lot longer than that. I'm going to talk about how it's produced, what the benefits are of not only producing it, but also using it, and how to incorporate it into your soil. And then there's one study I have on here and one I can talk about, and then what the future looks like for biochar. So yeah, it's not new, and it's thought to have been used at least 8,000 years ago in South America. They found in the soils where people had lived that the soil was extra dark, and so they call it terra preta, which is a Portuguese word that means black earth. Where people hadn't been, the earth was kind of like ours, kind of brownish tan gray, but where there had been people living, it was extremely dark. And they would take and cut down trees and burn them, but they wouldn't let them burn all the way. Then they would actually bury the burning pile. And so it removes the oxygen from the fire. So then it just kind of smolders and smolders. So they would slash and char areas of the Amazon basin, which they still do today. It's kind of they're doing it much faster than they could thousands of years ago. So we have equipment that'll tear out acres in a day where they would maybe take a few trees a day. So again, they burn it and they bury it to smolder, and it might smolder for days and days and days before it's kind of all down to what we call char. If you've ever been camping and you're having a campfire, and at the end of the night you got to put the fire out and you got to pour water on it, and then you wake up the next morning and you see all this black char. So that's wood that got burned, but it didn't turn into ash. So it kind of got preserved in that form. The stuff got burned into ash actually released its carbon into the atmosphere. But the black stuff you still have sitting in your fire pit, the carbon is still sequestered, it's still there. So it's no longer in this. The plants made it by photosynthesis and sucked it into the plant to grow. And then when you burn the leaves or compost the leaves, especially burning it, it releases that carbon back into the atmosphere. So that's how we get greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, which can have effects on our weather, because might be seeing. I hate to call it global warming because it can also be colder. It doesn't necessarily have to be warm. It can just be a change in climate. And down the Amazon, they were doing this for centuries. It was just going on and on and on for thousands of years. So they burned tons of trees over that time and incorporated it into their soils. And what they found was by doing this, the farmers learned that they could produce more food by adding this to the soil. The crops were bigger, that produced more food, which also made their population go up. So they cleared more land, cut more trees down, and it's a typical cycle that we still have today. But because of them incorporating it back into the soil, it allowed their population to thrive. And so, like I say, they would make their big piles and they would burn them. But when it got to a certain point, they would again cover them and smother probably with green leaves to turn it into just smoke, and then try to get it just underground to the smolder. On the left, that's a pile of debris being burned, but as you can see, the smoke and the fire is going into the atmosphere and is creating carbon dioxide. You don't want that. That's opposite of what you're trying to do. Then this nice little pit on the right, that's great for if you want heat. But if you burn it too much like that, it's not actually charring the wood. It's going to burn it all the way down. You don't have a way to necessarily cover it. But for a lot of people, this is the only way they could do it. I know in Africa, they would go and cut what little forest they had in some areas to make charcoal, and they would sell that to farmers or people just to keep their houses warm. Um, so this is how not to make it. Here's two soil profiles. So the one on the left is what's typical for anywhere you go. You can see it's darker on the left-hand picture. You see it's normal soil. It's a little darker at the top because it's got organic matter. Organic matter is just broken down over time and gradually incorporated into that soil. Now, what I learned in one of my soil classes is that it takes 500 years to make 1 inch of soil. Wow. So on these hills, every year that they grow grass and it dies and burns and dries and grows and burns, and it would take 500 years to make 1 inch of soil. So when you see a foot of soil being washed down a hill, that took a long time to make that soil. So when you hear about erosion and what happened in the Mississippi and the farming and all the dust, blowing that topsoil away, you can't get it back very quick. So the way they can tell where they did these burns was by the picture on the right. See how dark it is. Because the char is black, it really shows up in the soil as a real dark, dark soil. And I don't know about you, but I'm driving through the Central Valley, Modesto, where Riley lives, and you see those fields that are plowed and they're really dark. It's like, wow, look at that nice dark dirt. I never say that when it's just plain old tan. Everybody knows dark dirt is good. And not because we know about biochar, we just know that the darker dirt is a nicer soil that you like to have in your yard. And you can achieve it just by amendments. This is the machine. So this is called a carbonator. It's a really neat name. This was a video that they had online. And so the machine is picking up, looks like logs and things there. What they don't use is construction material, nothing with nails in it, paint. It's always trees that they'll use. And this machine may have a chipper in it. So they stick that log in there, it chips it up and spits it in there. Or they might chip it on the outside, which does use fuel, which does contaminate, the atmosphere, but you got to get it chopped up somehow. We don't have any electric chippers yet. And so it gets chopped up first, and then it's put into this machine, and it heats it up to about 1,300 degrees using a very zero flame, and I believe it has filters in there to capture the smoke, and turns the chipped up wood into biochar. There's no oxygen in there. It's very low oxygen. It seems to say no, but very low. And that process is called pyrolysis or pyrolysis. However you want to say it. Depends on what part of the country you're from. I'm just kidding. Depends on how educated you are. It's easier to say pyrolysis, but when you look at the word, it's not that easy. So this is the machine that they purchased, and I'd imagine it's very expensive. It's not a cheap thing. And it's on wheels, so it can move from place to place. So that's and there's a tractor, a tractor behind it with a grabber grabbing that wood.
Jeff, is that what they do? Do they move it from place to place, or do they leave it one place and bring the logs?
No, they bring it. They don't want to move the material because that costs fuel and everything. So they'd rather pile all the materials up in an area that's nearby. And this is up at Lake Chabot. You can see the eucalyptus trees in the background behind the carbonator. And so they haul them there.
And do they literally haul it? A truck or something hauls it? It's not a routine.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's like a single device, or they have more than a single device?
I don't know how many they have. I don't know how much they cost, but as far as I know, they just have the one. This particular one to use. And so they can do it, 10 hours a day, every day. Well, they don't do it on weekends, but it's, if you're having to haul the materials a long distance, then you're counteracting the whole purpose of protecting the environment. So you want to do this as local as possible. And that's probably why you don't see it being imported from South America. You don't see it being brought from other countries. Like, well, then that's going to be even more expensive. So it's better to keep it as local as possible. Getting these machines made, and as with everything, they get better and better. As they learn something new, they make it better and better. But yeah, this is on wheels, and
Do you have another picture of this to show where it all goes and like? So where does the biochar, it looks like it's coming out of.
no, I don't have a picture of how they get it out of there.
So it looks like it's coming out of that funnel up there, the biochar.
It looks like there's gates on the side or the back, and it lifts up, and they just drive it forward, and it falls out. But I'm not really sure. That's how it was described to me.
But so it looks like is it coming out of that black arm that's up? Is that the biochar coming out? What's the black
that's the
coming out?
tractor. That's a tractor that has that log, and he's moving it. He's grabbing it. Yeah, it's not connected to it.
Okay,
That's the tractor that moves the material.
and so then you're saying in those three bins, maybe three on the other side,
Mhm.
that's where the biochar is?
Right.
And then they
The,
open
and
that,
the motors and everything are on this end, the heater and
okay,
the-
and then they
the-
open that and it falls out, or they,
I'm not sure exactly how they get it out. They didn't say in the video. And so what you want to use is things that are high carbon organic materials. So trees is basically the thing. But again, you don't want to use construction materials. But I did watch a video where they could use pistachio shells. They could do walnut shells. They could do um, fruit pits. So like, what do you call them? Peaches and apricots and stuff, all those pits really don't get used for anything, so they could be actually burned into char. Rice hulls can be burning; they will burn faster. Corn cobs, any plant parts that can be burned, but they need to be able to do it without them being completely turned into ash. If you're making ash, you went too far. It's not biochar.
It's something like corn cobs and some.
They don't have to be dry, but they probably are, just because they're seed corn. It's not going to be sweet corn. Corn cobs are used like in bird litter and stuff, but this is another use for something that would get thrown out.
Did they have any concerns about the chemicals that are in eucalyptus trees that prevent plant competition?
When it goes through this process at 1300 degrees, it pretty much eliminates everything.
The chemicals.
Yeah, well, the natural chemicals. Yeah. The it's so hot, this is pretty much a sterile product at the end. And I'll get into the nutrition of it as we move through. So as you can see, everything that's a plant living organism that's organic in nature has carbon in it and can be turned into biochar. So we have an unlimited source of materials to use throughout the whole world. So the final product is a black charred campfire wood looking material. It's chunky and it's very lightweight compared to the wood that went in there that was heavy. It comes out light. It's really porous. It really doesn't have any odor except for right away when you burn it. It has that kind of a burnt smell, but that seems to go away fairly quickly. And it's dusty. So I put two U's because it's dusty. So before you start using it, you water it down, get it nice and wet, then it's not dusty. But it still can get your fingers wet if you're touching it. You know, it's just like cleaning your fireplace out. We've all done that, right? You get dirty. And that's ash, and this is actually, you know, the black part. One thing that's not good about it is a pile of biochar is extremely flammable because it's charcoal. It's what you use in your barbecue. So if somebody threw some lighter fluid on it and lit it, it would continue to burn all the way down to ash. So it's a very flammable material. Whether it's stored in a pile or containers, if a spark gets to it, it can go up quite easily. And it's sterile. It's sterile to the point where it's not like a laboratory sterile, but it's really got nothing in it. If there were termites in it, they're dead. If there was a fungus in it, it's dead. If there were seeds in there, they're dead. Seeds die at 140 degrees. So at 1300 degrees, there's nothing left alive in there. But because it's so new and the machinery is new, it's expensive. It's expensive to produce. And so hopefully it'll get cheaper and cheaper and more available.
So what are you providing to your soil if there's no fertility?
I'm getting to that. Very good, Carl. And this is what it looks like. This is a dog dish. I put some biochar in, and so this is ready to be used. This is after I've kind of run over it a few times, and there's chunks in there. There's some that are bigger. Some still kind of look like wood, but they're not wood anymore. And they make sure it stays in there long enough to completely get through the thickness of the wood that's in there. I'll show you. So this was a big pile we got in January under the blue and green tarp. And this is up behind the iris area. And they just brought a truckload and dumped it there. And then the next day he says, well, are you going to want any more? And I said, well, yeah. He says, because we're getting ready to start closing up this area that they've used up all the wood and they're going to move to somewhere else. And but they still had some if we wanted some. And I said, yeah, we'll take some more. And so just before the rains, I said, but make sure you get here before it rains because it gets too slippery back there. And you can't get there with the tractor. So the second time they brought us 10 bags, and these are called super bags, those white bags. So each one of those is full of biochar. And those they brought on a flatbed truck. And we had to use a tractor to lift the bags with forklift attachments to put them on the ground there. And they can stay in those bags for quite a long time. So we have a few years worth of biochar to use, not only in the iris garden, but also down below. And the nice thing for the park district, for us, it's free. So Quarry Lakes has gotten it. I believe the Botanic Garden has gotten some. Other gardens have gotten it. I think the Prush Garden down in San Jose, I think they got some from this program. And so after he delivered those 10 bags, and Pablo, the guy that's the leader of the group, who works for our fire department, he says, well, I'm glad we got it delivered today because as of right now, we're shut down because of the federal grant. All the monies were turned off. So everybody was done. Our equipment's all off. We can't do anything. We can't make any more. And so I don't know what the status is right now, if their money's coming back in so they can pay the company that's making it for them. He's working with a company that's kind of like a subcontractor, and they have their employees. They come in and make the stuff, and then they deliver it. And I thought, oh, I left my phone on. So that was unfortunate that it was temporarily shut down. You know, when something gets shut down, it can take a while to get going again and getting material ready. But I think that area was done, so they were in a process of moving somewhere else. He didn't say where, but I know in Oakland Hills they had a bunch of trees die in the drought. And they're just trying to remove fire hazards. You know, you saw what happened in Southern California, and that was a neighborhood, and we have all these wildlands that can just burn up, just like those trees in the background.
Question: is this like an amendment like stand where once you put it in, you then have to put it in?
Pretty much, yeah. So like in that soil profile, that's been there 5,000 to 7,000 years, and it's still there. They still see it. It still works. So, but it was also put there for thousands of years too. You know,
So Jeff, did that come in by truck or by the carbonator actually drove up?
no,
there?
not the carbonator. No, they probably have piles of it up there, and then they use the tractor
Okay.
to put it into the bags. They probably have a big funnel thing. They put it into that fills the bags. Easier for them to deliver, as long as there's a tractor on site, which we had.
But the pile that was there just came by truck, like dump truck?
It was a dump truck, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like the guys that haul your junk away, you know,
Yes.
with the wooden panels on the side, they just came up and then it just lifts and drops it off. Yeah. Very easy delivery if you have the room, which we do. So the biggest benefit of biochar is that it improves your soil structure. Um, we know how bad clay is as far as the structure. It's sticky in the winter and it's hard as a rock in the summer and it's hard to work with. But nutrition wise, it's great. It's got a lot of nutrients in it. It just has really poor structure. So biochar is the most important part of biochar is that it improves how your soil is structured. Um, it'll also remediate toxic soils. So charcoal is used in aquariums to make the water clear, removes odor. It's used in many filters, air filters and stuff. It removes odor and it'll remove chemicals. So it will absorb those things if it's in the soil. So in these brown sites, using charcoal in soil is wonderful because over time it will absorb that stuff. Um, Turning the trees into biochar also reduces how big of a pile you have. So a big pile of wood can be turned into a much smaller pile of biochar. So they're also doing experiments with sewage sludge. So they can actually take sewage and burn it and reduce the size of it by 90%. So you got a big pile. When you burn all that down, only 10% of the volume is left. So it's for our landfills are filling up and things. It's a great way to reduce piles. It revitalizes exhausted soils. So these farms that just they don't ever put compost in their soils because it's just too expensive. It's too big to do, and because nature is always adding compost because every year the grass grows, it dies, it grows, it dies, and that's compost basically, and that's how we get that 1 inch of soil every 500 years. But when it's farmed, it just we take, we don't put back. So this is a way to put something back into the soil, and it helps these exhausted soils. It's also it can be locally produced, so you don't have to import it from another country or from another state or from another part of the state. It can be made anywhere where there's trees and material to use. It reduces fertilizer use. So by it enhancing the soil, you don't have to use as much fertilizer or really any fertilizer. And I always say that I don't use fertilizer at the garden and the irises because I use a lot of compost. And mixing biochar with compost is essential. So just using biochar by itself helps the structure, but it doesn't really do anything for making the soil things grow better. But when you mix it with compost, the biological activity going on in the compost is absorbed by the biochar. And now it's a good material to use. Still not a fertilizer. Biochar helps retain moisture in soil at root level. So when they've used it for trees during a drought, the soils stay wet longer by as much as a month and a half longer into the summer. So that's quite a big difference because, so it holds 7 times its weight in water. So I've always kind of thought of it as a sponge. It's out there, it's just absorbing everything, but it itself is not a fertilizer. And then the best part about it is that it lasts 100 to more than 1,000 years. You do it one time, unless you're going to live 1,001 years, you might have to do it twice. But and it might last longer than that. You really don't know. But when you go to a forest, you went to Yellowstone when they had the fire in 1988. Those dead burned trees are still dead burned trees. They're still there. If anything got into the soil, it's still in there. It doesn't break down. It's not compost. Compost goes away, but biochar. Any questions? There's more benefits. It sequesters carbon dioxide. It doesn't get rid of it. It just sequesters it. So it puts it in this burn form in the soil, eventually say it lasts 1,001 years, on that 1,001 year, it's going to start releasing that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which is what burning does immediately. So we're delaying the carbon dioxide going back in the air by putting it into this charred form. Just like peat moss, just like oil, just tar, all that stuff has been sequestered. And then when we use these fossil fuels and burn them and use them, it's being released back into the air. So it's really better to leave the oil where it is, and the charcoal, coal is same idea. When we burn it, we're releasing that back into the atmosphere. So by these trees being burned to a certain point, it's getting put back into the soil, and now it's gone again. Yes, Kathy.
Is biochar as efficient at carbon sink as peat bog? You know,
I don't know. It didn't
they're
compare.
basically doing the same.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing. Yeah. And so it helps protect the bog because we don't have to use it as much. The peat moss is good because it's got an acid pH to it. It's not a fertilizer either. It's just a soil amendment, and it holds a lot of water. But if we can not use the peat, just leave it where it is, and not expose all that methane gas, then it's better to leave it where it is. Biochar filters water. So when you water, it's absorbing things from the water. If there was biochar in a river or at a dam and they were putting it through there, it would also remove lots of chemicals and things. So in farm areas where they are using a lot of fertilizer and they have runoff, it would be a great thing to put into the soil because it absorbs that rather than let it run off. Biochar is also edible. Animals can eat it. I started using it last year in the iris beds, and the ground squirrels are coming in and they're digging little tiny holes in the beds that I put the biochar. They're not touching the other beds, only the beds with the biochar, because they're finding the biochar to eat it because it makes them feel better. It's helping their digestion.
Can't too much hot sauce.
Yeah. If I could just make them a little more toxic and it would get into the squirrels, but and
Nancy's.
okay. And one more of a personal story, I would say 15, 20 years ago, my wife is a veterinarian, and one of her clients in Martinez has a swimming pool, and they use pool chemicals in the pool. And they had the bag of it or bucket outside, and they had a couple peacocks, and their female peacock got into the pool chemicals. The bag tore, some little granules in the ground, the peacock ate it. And so they called her and says, "Oh, she doesn't look good. We think she may have gotten into pool chemicals. They saw them on the ground. She probably got into the bag." And her eyes were half lit from the bottom, so that lids were up. And she was just stood there with her head down. So she obviously was being poisoned. And so my wife looked up and how to remedy a bird who was eating something toxic. And so she got liquid charcoal, and we put it in like a bakery bags, what they call them, doing frosting. Yeah, so we mixed it in powder and mixed it in there, and I'm the bird person, so I know how to stick a tube down a bird's throat and get it into their crop. And so we filled her crop up with this charcoal mixture to absorb the chemical. And I think she'd been sick for a couple of days. Luckily, she didn't die in that time. And then the next day, her eyes were back to normal. And the day after that, she laid an egg. Like, wow. Yeah. So she survived because of the charcoal that we gave her. So the charcoal wasn't a fancy pharmaceutical that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and treatments at a hospital and stuff. It just got it into her system that it was done soon enough that the stuff was still there because she can't digest it, and it absorbed it and passed it right through.
Wow, so is the biochar pretty much pure charcoal?
Yeah. There's nothing else in it. Yeah. So again, animals can use it, and it doesn't hurt them. It actually helps them. And they have their instincts. We don't have our instincts anymore. We've lost all of our instincts. Animals know, can't eat this stuff. It helps. So one of the Pablo, he said, "Do you have chickens?" I said, "Yeah, we have chickens in the garden." He says, "Well, put the biochar into the chicken coop as a litter." And I said, "Well, all my white chickens will be black." um, but he said, "No." He said, "Yeah, it's dirty. The feet will be black and stuff." So I haven't done it yet, but I need to clean it out first, all the way down to the sand, and then put about a 3 inch layer of biochar in there, put straw on top so they get less black. Um, and then leave it in there for 6 months or 8 months, and then you take it all out. Well, now because they've been pooping in it, all the chicken manure is in there, and all the nitrogen and ammonia from the chicken manure is going to pre-charge the biochar. Now it's a fertilizer. Now it's absorbed what's all around it, and it does it fast because chicken manure is pure. It's between cow manure and chicken manure is better because chickens don't pee. Because that little white part of the manure is the ammonia. And what do you put on your lawn to make your lawn green? Ammonia, because it's all nitrogen, turns it really green. So by using the biochar in your chicken coop, you're turning your biochar into a fertilizer that's already absorbed everything. Now it's in the soil, it can take 3 or 4 years to absorb nutrients to that level. But when you put it in a chicken coop or under a rabbit coop, and if you have rabbits, they can get really stinky with all that urine and the poop, and it's great manure, fertilizer, but boy, it's really stinky. So if you put a layer of charcoal down, and then every time you clean up, that charcoal is going to be absorbing it and be full of nutrients. So that's how you get nutrients into the biochar. Or you wait 3 years in the soil and then get there eventually. Another way they're trying to use it is with cement. Another way to sequester it is to mix it with cement. Now it's gone forever. Now it's never coming back and going back into the atmosphere. So grind it into a powder and mixing it with Portland cement. It doesn't degrade the cement, but it's now sequestered and it's gone. It's not going back. So it can help in that way. It can be used in potting soils, but only if it's been pre-charged. So put it in the potting soil that's got fertilizer in it, will actually suck the fertilizer away from the plants because it wants it too. So it will compete. So if you could take the biochar, and I was thinking, I didn't read anything about this, but if you had a 32-gallon bucket or a swimming pool full of biochar, and then you poured a water-soluble fertilizer with water into the container, and then let it just evaporate, it'll absorb all that nutrient. Now it's also got fertilizer. So they're trying to get potting soil companies to use it. They would grind it up to a real fine amount and probably also recharge it. And then it has an increased health for forests and agriculture. So whenever there's a forest fire, the very next year after it rains, there's flowers coming up all over the place, and then new trees are growing, and everything grows really fast. So that's another sign how good burn plants can be after a fire. It's pest resistant. So in Japan, I didn't put in the program what it's called, but they actually will build houses and they say it's brand new for redwood. And they'll take the wood and they'll char it with like a torch. And then they sand it and sand it. Now, if you don't like a black house, that's too bad. But your house will be black, but the termites will never attack your house. They don't eat char. They don't like it. So it's a repellent. So if you have it in the soil, you're probably also not going to get bad bugs in your soil because they're going to run into that like, oh, this soil's got that stuff in it. Let's go somewhere else. So it's very good it doesn't kill bugs, it just repels them. They don't want to live where there's burned material. It also resists compaction. So one of the biggest problems is like in parking lots in our parks is we've got these trees in the parking lot and everybody's parking around them and smashing the soil, and soil needs air. So charcoal, you can squeeze it, it'll break into pieces, but it's not a sponge that will smash and get tighter and tighter. So it resists compaction. So once it's in there, whether it's to help things grow or not, it does resist compaction and keeps the soil softer. And yes, there's more. It improves the nutrient use efficiency and availability, but it itself has no nutrients in it. So just like I said, by it being there over a few years, if you're fertilizing, that's great. It'll absorb that fertilizer and hold it there. And as the plant roots grow down, they can grow into the biochar and extract the nutrients back out. So it's always there and available. Just you got to get the plants there to use it. It doesn't do anything to the pH. It itself is pretty much neutral. It has been burned so hot, it's just basic. It improves habitat for microbes. So because it's so light, and if you know what the vascular tissue of wood and plants are, there's all these pores in there. And I read one thing and I couldn't find where I wrote it down, but I think they said if you took a cup of biochar and spread out all the surface material in that one cup, it's as big as a basketball court. It's how much surface area there is in one cup of material. So that's places for bacteria, good bacteria, fungus, things that help break down other stuff to live all over all those surfaces, top and bottom and in between. There's where I have where it holds up to 7 times its weight of water. Very large surface area can creating micro and macro pores for air, water, beneficial bacteria, and the fungus to break down organic materials. I love the rototill. People are like, oh, no rototill, that's bad. But I love rototilling, and I love that soft dirt. It's easy to plant in, and you're getting lots of air down in the soil. Now, you don't have to rototill. You can double dig. You can. There's different ways to turn your soils over and stuff. But rototilling, farmers do it twice a year. I do it maybe once every 3 years when I'm, planting the beds. But the important thing with biochar is you have to get it into the soil. You can't just leave it on top. It's not a surface dressing. It has to be in there to have contact with the soil. So putting a layer on top doesn't do anything. And they found that plants have more robust root systems after a few years. I already talked about it, prevents leaching of soil fertilizers. So going into creeks and rivers, it'll help hold it in the soil rather than letting it run away. And unless there's a flood, of course, floods are not good, but they can't hold on to it that fast. And it replaces the need for peat moss, perlite, what's the other one? It's like perlite, vermiculite. Yeah. So you really just need compost and biochar to add to your soil. Any questions?
Can we buy it from,
No.
do you think that was going to be a possibility?
Probably other companies. I know that, what's the nursery over here, Slope?
Yeah.
I think they have it.
Yeah.
It's in a 1 cubic foot bag.
Expensive.
It's 40 bucks. Yeah, 40 bucks.
So how
How
much,
big?
1 cubic foot. So,
so how much, Jeff, would you put? What's the ratio of this to soil? If you were
what
gonna
I
mix-
what I
let's say in a
read,
pot.
but you wouldn't use it in a pot
Why?
because you're using potting soil, which already has everything in it that it needs. And if you put it in a pot, it's got like I use Miracle Grow, which has fertilizer. The biochar in the pot is going to steal the fertilizer. Like, oh, there's fertilizer. Let's absorb it, and then the plants don't have it right away.
Right away they don't, but long term,
Yeah,
it's gonna be in a pot for 100 years.
right. So, like in the nursery industry, they're not keeping their plants in the pots for a long time. They're just planting them, getting them to the store, selling them. They don't care about long-term stuff.
Okay, so let's go back and say.
If you got big pots, yeah, I would put. They're talking about 5 to 10% into your soil. So if you have a 1 gallon, or say you got 1 gallon of biochar to 10 gallons of soil, about 10%. Yeah.
Do you know if you're talking about the beneficial bacteria and fungus, does that mean that, I suppose this has always been considered in the fullness of time? So all your mycorrhizal fungi, all your subterranean, like worms and all those
Mhm.
things are very happy and
Yeah.
they've survived well in that.
Yep.
I had a quick look when, Jan was asking about the carburetor.
Carbonator.
It had a name on it, it was Fall Forestry.
Yeah,
And this company is the company that goes around with this machinery. So if you need some pictures, there's some pictures in there on their website that shows you, because the machinery is actually not that wide, and all you can see, it's got a top-down thing with all of it being burned inside with no smoke. Because that was all apparently open at the top, but there was no
yeah,
smoke or
Yeah.
anything coming out, even though it was red hot inside.
yeah.
So this company must go around all over the place and provide to probably the forestry service, and I don't know, do they use it
Couldn't
in
they
like
do-
water treatment plants and stuff, or filtering water?
Well, they would sell them the materials, but not necessarily the equipment.
Well, no, exactly,
Yeah,
just yeah.
What about going to cities, like all of our cities that collect compost?
Yeah, so there was one article I read when I've been talking about what the future is. The city of Thousand Oaks, the staff that works for the city and the landscape maintenance is not allowed to plant anything unless they're using biochar. So everything has to have biochar. Because the guy who wrote the article lives in Thousand Oaks. So he went to the city council meeting and he got it passed that they have to use biochar. And so,
Thousand Oaks is a very dry area on the coast.
right, so they found in Thousand Oaks that they didn't have to water as much. And after 7 years, they didn't lose any trees except one because it got hit by a car. And the trees that had been planted before that were not using biochar were struggling. So
So
By
that's
using-
$999.
yes. Yeah, just like over there in 29 Palms, they lost some, so they've only got 19 left. So because he went to the city council, he did a presentation and told them this is really important to use, and so their trees grow better. They don't have to use as much fertilizer, so they reduce costs over time, actually. Initially, it's expensive.
But do they produce their own?
It didn't say. I'm gonna guess
I mean,
not.
but I'm thinking like, so the city of Walnut Creek
Mhm.
that collects all that compost in new containers.
Well, that's compost, that's different.
No, it's different.
Okay, so
That's
that couldn't be used.
No, that breaks down too fast. That's
Okay.
green leafy material, all that lawn out there.
Okay,
It breaks down so fast. And if you burned it, it would become ash.
okay.
At 1300 degrees, it's ash. You know, it's fast. Like when you open the door on Mars, you're ash. It's fast. It's got to have a much more a woody material.
It
So
should be a condition of all the tree arborists that go around and cut down and do a big
yeah, they have all these chips.
teaching and all the rest
Yeah,
of
they
it.
have, they have all these chips they can't get rid of. Nobody wants them. It's like we have all these
It's
chips to get rid of.
snacks.
Yeah. So
That's what I'm thinking.
that's
There
what
you go.
that's what they really want to do is get it to where it's
All the tree producers.
all local, it's all kept. You don't want to have it being shipped from Idaho or from
Right.
Canada. It all needs to be produced. And once they have these machines, then they just operate them. And I'm sure the machines are using gasoline or diesel to use. So there is some stuff. But when I get into the one of the last studies, you'll see where the differences are. Okay, so using biochar. So here we are. You need to be worked into the soil, not as a top dressing. And like I said, I prefer to make it less chunky. You know, if it's a field and you're just going to be putting it out there and plowing it in, who cares? But in your garden, you don't want to be sitting there and finding these chunks of material that you're having an out touch and move out of the way. Or you're trying to stick a sign in the ground and you're hitting this piece of biochar that's like, they won't go past it. So I'm trying to figure out a way to take it. I thought a chipper or something. It's just like, oh, the dust, the black dust will just.
Yeah. Yucky.
Yeah. So I would.
Sifted?
Yeah, but there would be very little sifted at the bottom. It'd be all because there is a lot of big stuff in there. Yeah. So yeah, you can sift it, but then what do you do with the other stuff, which is probably like 80% of it. Big.
Is it so large when you deliver it that
Three.
they're like logs?
They're not that big, but they're size a $50 to a quarter, and that's kind of big. You know, if you're working in your soil, you don't want chunky stuff in there, so that's why we're running it over. So I thought of a garbage disposal, had it set up on a table. You just kind of throw it through there and put it through. But again, it's the dust. It's like, yeah. Something that'll chop it up because it breaks up easily. It doesn't need something that like for wood because it's so much easier to chop up than wood. But something that you can put it through real quick that just breaks it up. And now if you got it wet, that'll make it much less for doing that. So I have to try an experiment of some way to
What about a real hand crank?
hand crank. You see how high those bags are? I look like Arnold Schwarzenegger afterwards.
Oh, yes. On one arm.
Yeah. One of my arms will be this big. Yeah, for the home garden, it's a whole different. You could break it up easy. You can put it in a bag and hit it with your meat tenderizer, and do it that
With
way.
your rototiller?
Could you?
I
roll
tried
it?
doing it with rototiller.
Okay,
It doesn't. No.
Could you put it in bags and just drive over it?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're driving over it with the mule. I need a bigger truck.
Yeah.
So again, it's very slow to take up nutrients in the soil. So it takes 2 or 3 years before you're going to see maybe results, and you're not going to know if it's the results from the compost or if it's results from the biochar. Because if you're not using them together, you're not going to see as much, and I'll get to that at the end. It's best if used or mixed with fresh compost. It can be used as a chicken litter in chicken coops to recharge it, like I talked about.
You don't need 3 feet there on the next one, 3 inches.
Yes, it was supposed to be 3 inches. You're right. Probably didn't have my glasses high enough on my nose at the time. Because we look over our glasses, then we look down to our glasses. So I add about 1 inch to the topsoil and about 3 inches of compost, and then I mix it in, and I use the rototiller. And I have some photos. And water down before working with it, and you could soak it in a water-soluble fertilizer if you wanted to try that as an experiment. And again, you never have to use it again. It's a one-time purchase.
You mean water the top of the soil before you throw the till.
No, water down the biochar. Like we have a big pile down there, and I took volunteers down there to put it in the wheelbarrows. But we got the hose first, because we don't inhale it. Your nose will be blowing black for days in your ears, and so if you water it, it just takes all that dust away. It's amazing. It's just nothing. So this is compost. And this was last July. I think it was July. And this is a bed that I finally threw out the seedlings from Hooker Nichols. They've been sitting there for 5 years. I was like, okay, I need this bed now. It was full of poppies and weeds and stuff. So rototilled it, and I threw lots of compost on top. And that's what it looks like with the biochar on top of the compost. And then I rototill it in. And if you look at the pathway on the right-hand picture, or even the other picture, see the color difference between the soil I don't add stuff to and the soil that I do. Just doing the compost makes it darker, but then adding the biochar makes it really black. But it's surprising how it looks like a lot, but when I rototill it in, you almost can't see it. It's like, think, oh, I just put enough. But when you get your hands in there and start pulling through there, you like, oh yeah, it's in there. It's all just incorporated. So don't be afraid to add too much compost, and then put more than you think, because this is your chance to put it in. You can't go back and just put some on top and it'll work its way in. It's do it right the first time. Here's the rototiller again, and on the right picture, that right hand side is where I rototilled it in, and in the middle is where I hadn't gone over it yet. And this is right near where I found that Indian mortar grinding stone. And they didn't use any biochar. The ground wasn't black. And then you can plant it right away. You don't have to wait. You don't have to do anything. It's ready right away. Now compost, when we get it, it's usually pretty hot. But once hot being at temperature, it's warm, it's steaming still. But when I put it on top, and that day or the next day, rototill it in, it's cool right away because it's been mixed in with native soil. And so it's ready to plant right away. And like I say, it's visible on the surface and when you're digging, so you'll see little chunks of biochar. So when you come out to the garden, you look at the beds that I've added it to so far. It's you can see it a little bit sitting there. And the wildlife seems to like it. The soil stays loose. Again, it helps prevent compaction. I first used it in February of 2024 into the iris beds, and then I added it to the main garden below in the summer, last summer of 2024. Both areas. I don't feel like doing the projects and experimenting with only using biochar because I don't want to wait 3 years. I'll be retired.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to wait to find out the experiment. So so you have it down below, and I haven't rototilled it in yet down there, but we did add
Did
the
you add
compost.
fertilizer? Just the compost.
Yeah, I've never used fertilizer. If I want irises as big as Mary's, yeah, she got those huge flowers. Or
You would add fertilizer.
yes. Let me go back. Let's see. And so in the bed that I used it in last year, the irises are growing good, but I don't know if it's the biochar, if it's a compost. More than likely it's the compost because I always get really good growth from using the compost. And time will tell if growth is better, 2027. And I like being able to use it. It's just one more component of the soil, which adds diversity to the soil and loosens it up. And so this is one of the beds down below that got flooded in 2022, I think is what it was, 23. The years are flying by, I can't remember. All the plants are gone that were there. They all got buried and then factored out. Those logs are laying there. The one on the right-hand side, that big stump that floated there during the flood. That's how deep the water was.
Architectural.
Yep. They took out the other 100 logs, but I got them to leave 5. So this bed, the compost has already been rototilled in, and then when the volunteers and I went, so we watered it down the pile, and then we used the 4-wheel drive golf cart thing to bring it back there and dump it. And so it's still just sitting on the surface, so I need to get it the rototiller, rototill it in. I have to replace the tines on my tiller; they're all pretty much worn off. The picture on the left is the other bed next to that first one I showed you, and this was August 16th last year. And the picture on the right is less than 2 months later.
Wow.
So
What kind of compost do you use?
we just buy it at the local place.
Delivered.
We go get it.
Oh,
Yeah, we have a big dump truck, so we buy 3 yards at a time. And we've always gotten, all the years I've been there, we've always gotten it from the place. It's called Site 1. It used to be Clark's Soil and Rock. And so the iris is on the right-hand side. The one in the very right corner, lower corner, is one of the door prize irises from Mount Diablo. So it was planted in late September. But the other ones were planted in August and into early September before I went on a cruise. And those irises had been in pots for 3 years, 4 years. So they got really happy to be put in the ground. Yeah, like the one with the yellow tag, you can see the increases coming up through the soil.
yeah.
There's not even a rhizome nearby, and they're coming up from nowhere. So I love compost, and you can see the biochar kind of sprinkled in throughout on that right-hand photo.
Mhm.
So that's what it looks like. Some people might see it and think, "Oh, something burned here." Like there was a fire. But no, we put that in there. That's the look. But
You fool the archaeologists.
that's right. Like,
Yeah.
there's got to be more mortars here somewhere. I see all the char.
Yeah.
But so that's the growth. And this is summertime, or fall, and they're growing really good. And so I really like it. So the soils that it helps the most, see if you can find your soil in here, is low organic matter soil, which can be everybody's home that was scraped and built on soil. High clay soils, which is what we have. High sand or gravel soil. So if you live in Alameda, you're on a sand mound, you can't get it to hold fertilizer, you can't get it to hold water, it just runs right through. So it has very poor retention of water and nutrients, so it helps that. It helps compacted soil. It helps soils that don't drain well, so ones that are either staying really wet all the time or ones that are when there's big storms, water sits there. Container and planter soils, it helps long term, but not for anything immediate. So if you're replacing the soil every year, don't use biochar because you're just throwing it out. It's not an immediate fix. You have to have patience. It's something that's for the future. And then over time, the soil actually improves by having the biochar there. So the longer it's there, the better it gets. And just like in that soil profile, they had used it. And it probably was chunky at one point, but over time it got smaller and smaller to where it's real fine powder. So this was a study they did here in California in Monterey County at Oasis Vineyard, a field trial. And they have sandy soil with very low organic matter. So they're Monterey by the coast, where they don't have really that great soils in some areas, especially where they're going to plant grapes. They took an 8-acre parcel, and this was after 6 years. And for each of these sections, it was 2 acres for each trial. And so the control 2 acres, they didn't do anything to the soil. No fertilizer, no biochar, no compost. But they watered everything exactly the same. The second one, they used biochar only. They used 10 tons per acre. And in that section, after 6 years, they were making $11,432 more per acre. And that was after they took out the cost.
These are not costs, these are revenues.
This is revenue. This is after they took off the cost of the biochar. So they bought the biochar, sold their crop, took off the cost of the biochar, and they still had $11,000 more than if they didn't use in that control one. In the one that was compost only, they used 15 tons per acre because compost is heavier. And they generated $15,689 more per acre. So that's $30,000 over those 2 acres by using compost only. So it shows again, compost is really good. It's even better than biochar. And that's after paying the cost of paying for the compost. And then in the last 2 acres, they used compost and biochar, 15 tons per acre of compost and 10 tons per acre of biochar. And they made $17,607 more per acre after all of the benefits costs were paid. So that's the study that shows that they made a lot more money by adding this organic material. And that's because they didn't have to buy fertilizer. They didn't have to buy these other things to add to the soil and chemicals. And the fruit is going to be, I wouldn't call it organic, but it's much better than using inorganic.
And so technically, every year they're gonna make $17,000.
Yes.
Because they're not adding in.
Well, you don't have to use the biochar, but compost, they probably need to add it every couple of years. Because compost doesn't last.
Okay, so 17,000 the first year, but the second year, they don't have to take off the cost of biochar.
Never biochar again, so
So-
it'll be higher.
So it's gonna be higher.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So there's lots of information online. Just Google biochar and you can find hours and hours of reading. Ask me how I know. So think about adding it to your garden. Again, you only got to do it once or do a section. If you got 3 years left, do a section.
3 years left of life.
It's being used all over the world. There's studies in China and Europe and Canada and here and Mexico, and they're doing it everywhere. And so you can just and read the ones that people that don't like it and why they don't like it. And they don't like it. You have to use gasoline to chop up the chips. That you have to send it over distances to get it to the field. To use the tractors to. There is some cost with
But you do that with fertilizer.
yes, but they're not looking at that.
And pesticides.
They're
and
not looking at
everything.
that. If you can buy it in bulk, if you have a big yard or you want to, buy a lot of it, do it all at once, it's better to buy in large quantity. So, having a big pile of it delivered. I think my brother had asked me about it a few months ago, and I think he found a place that had a truckload, which may have been 3 yards for $2,000. So if you want to invest some money and then it can just sit there, but it is a fire hazard. Remember, if somebody throws a cigarette, it could catch on fire in the middle of the night. And it's going to be locally produced. The stuff in the bags, I think it is within California, but I don't remember the name on the bag that was that slope of who made it.
Oh, yeah.
Tell your friends about it, and any other questions?
So could we buy it in bulk, and I don't mean like 3 yards necessarily, and then club members?
I would suppose you have to. I don't know if the company that we're getting it from also sells it, because the guy who delivered, he's just a delivery guy. He's like, "What's this stuff for?"
Yeah, right, you know what it is.
No. So
If your brother found someplace.
yeah, I don't know if you got it from a rockery place that sells compost and stuff too. Might be a special order. I mean, imagine maybe the place up in Sonoma, I think it's called Sonoma Soil, they probably sell it. So if you're looking for more of the guru pot producing places, they're gonna have more of these green materials and organic
But is
stuff.
this something that other club members would be interested in?
That's up to them. It is messy to deal with.
Yeah, that's the part is going to one location, then gathering it up, take it to you.
Yeah. So the bag thing is nice because it is in a nice clean bag and
Right.
it's easy to transport that way. But if you had a big pile of it, then yeah,
But if we found someplace that sold, like if you bought 10 bags.
and the stuff I saw at the store, when I touched the bag.